And welcome into another post-game edition of Spits and Suds. And like we said the other night, oh, how sweet it is to say that again. Welcome, everybody, to Spits and Suds. I'm Gavin Spittle of 1053 The Fan. Stars pick up their second straight preseason win, kind of exciting fashion, with a last-second goal by the man that everyone's talking about, the top draft pick from just a few years ago, Lian Bichsel. And joining us tonight is one of our top draft picks on Spits and Suds, the greatness known as Robert Tiffin. And he's got a really cool website, and Robert's a great writer, and you can read his stuff on starsthoughts.com. And of course, we always celebrate D Magazine and the coverage that they give with the writings of Sean, with the writings of David Castillo, and also author Robert Tiffin. And he joins us live tonight. How are you, my friend?
Doing pretty well, Gavin. It's good to have hockey back again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is great to have you back. You've been covering training camp. Let's first dive into kind of the game tonight. An extremely sloppy game at times, 5-on-3s galore. Lots and lots of penalties, certainly not as clean as the St. Louis game the other night, but I guess the headline story would be, Bichsel standing out once again as one of those guys that likely is, barring an injury, going to start at Texas, which is good because he'll get a lot of minutes at Texas, but certainly proving, at least in this preseason, that he's making a case that probably deserves to be on an NHL squad as well.
Yeah, he's had overall a good couple games. In Traverse City, I know I think Sean mentioned a little bit with y'all that it wasn't, really a great showing for him necessarily in Traverse City. You'd kind of expect more from someone like him who's, got his size and skills and kind of the expectations around him playing against younger kids. But in game one, certainly he looked really good against the Blues on Saturday. And in this one, he kind of redeemed himself to a certain extent because he started off with a little bit of a giveaway behind the net, getting losing the puck along the boards, so whether it's a giveaway or he got stripped or he just lost the puck, that looks bad. But then, you saw both his physicality and if that's how you want to describe trying to beat someone to a pulp, I guess, on the ice. And then you saw his offensive instincts too, winning the game at the buzzer. So overall, I'd say that it's been a much better 2 games for him than the 2 games in Traverse City for sure.
The other story that I think is kind of forming is that the Stars, we talk about defensive depth. I was talking about that the other night, and clearly the forwards are set, and we're waiting to see who that 13th forward will be. But, one of the things that we talked about is the depth as far as goaltending, with Casey DeSmith performing really well the other night. And in the last 2 games, Magnus Hellberg really, making some terrific saves tonight, breakaway, and then just making some stunners against the Avalanche. He's played terrific in it would be 3 periods of action.
Yeah, he's one of those goalies, right? He's been around a lot. He's played for a ton of different teams. I think he's 33 or something like that. So he's been around the block. He's played in different leagues, but he is big. He is, even around camp, you notice him. He sticks out. They've got a couple big goalies, but he's listed, I think, at 6'6", and he's a big guy. And you kind of saw it tonight with the sort of different styles. Both, he had some incredible saves. He had to, right, on both with all the special teams, a couple breakaways. There were a lot of breakdowns by both teams in this game. It's funny, as an aside, in the first game against the Blues, it was kind of, we were talking about it with the coaches on Saturday with DeBoer a little bit after the game, that it was sort of an ideal game sort of to evaluate players because you had a little bit of special teams both ways. You had a lot of 5-on-5 and you were able to kind of roll lines and just see it was a pretty good physical game. I don't know how good this game is for evaluating players.
Yeah.
But it's great for evaluating goalies because they got lots of chances. And Hellberg, I think, had a couple of just outstanding stops, especially in the second period. He was just, but even in the first 2, he definitely seems to have jumped into that third spot in the kind of pecking order. Last year they had Matt Murray as that third guy. And when Ottinger was down for a while and Wedgwood came up, they were really hesitant to play Matt Murray. And I think Wedgwood played 10 or 11 games in a row before they finally gave Murray a game. So the depth they have now, I think, even with Poirier looking pretty good tonight, I think they're a lot more comfortable with the depth they have at goal now.
Well, what's really interesting too, Robert, is, and I need to ask Sean about this, if it makes coaching easier stylistically, you basically have 4 goalies that are very large individuals and kind of have the same style.
Yeah. Well, Smith isn't as large. He's a little smaller. I think he's like 6'1" or something. But
More
you're
of a
right that his.
stand-up,
But
whereas
you're right that
Wedgie
his.
was kind of.
Yeah. You're right. His style though is much more similar to Ottinger, and I think they've said this. I think the coaches have said as much too. That he very much technically, Wedgwood, had some great games, but his style was using his size and athleticism and kind of make the save however you can, and it worked for him, right? But there could be some benefit to having a goalie that's a little bit more technically sound, like DeSmith, which not to say that Wedgwood was technically unsound. He just had different ways to make saves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right that there's a lot more technical similarity, especially between Ottinger and DeSmith.
Well, one of the things I did like about Casey DeSmith as far as the offseason pickup, and I agree, I thought Wedgwood did a nice job filling in, but that was a lot of games for Wedgwood as far as his career. But when you look at Casey DeSmith, and you look 36 games with Pittsburgh, then it went 20, 26, 38, 29. So he's used to the backup role, but he's also used to logging 30 plus games a year, which I think is important. So, having some consistency as far as a backup and then getting him on a 3-year deal at $1 million per year, I think is very good value.
Yeah, and they really needed that value apparently. I mean, that it sounds like was the sticking point, right? That extra 500,000 that Wedgwood was looking for. And at first, I got to be honest, I was kind of wondering about that choice because Wedgwood had seemed like a pretty good fit and everyone, had great things to say about him in terms of, how he worked with Ottinger and encouraged him, just kind of being a great teammate for a couple of years in Dallas. And so you wondered at first if they were maybe rolling the dice a little bit by bringing in someone new just to save, $500,000. But it's, early days so far, but with DeSmith's experience, I mean, he has that track record, like you mentioned, of being able to come in and be that solid backup who can come in and kind of, what you're getting with him. And he's had times where he's had to fill in for longer stretches too. So it seems like he's a pretty known quantity, at least as far as any backup you might get around the league. Of course, the regular season will really be the most telling, but so far, and even on Saturday, he really seemed very comfortable, very technically. Even the saves, I mean, the pucks were going very much, where he wanted them to go, whether it was to the corner or the side, or he was swallowing up. It seemed like he was very much in command. So that's a good sign early for Dallas.
He has a terrific Scrabble name, and he's fighting for that 13th position. Artuu Hyry with a goal tonight. Yeah. He's a fascinating player, and you have a solid team, Robert, when you're talking about, okay, who's going to fill out the healthy scratches and be up with the big squad rather down in Texas. So I like his size, only 23 years old. Interesting. Very fascinated to see if Jere Lehtinen had any kind of input on this because he's so big with the Finn national team. But I'm fascinated, is it going to be Blümel? What are your thoughts? It's only 2 games in, so I know that a lot of camp left, but some interesting names as far as who's going to fill that roster spot.
Yeah, I think those are kind of going in the 3 or 4 names that, you've seen people toss out for that 13th spot have been Oscar Beck, Artuu Hyry. You just mentioned him. Cole Lind and
I
Maddie
thought
Blümel.
Cole Lind played well.
Cole Lind and Maddie Blümel. Yeah. And Blümel, he played well. He also gave up a chance where he tried a back pass to I think it was Hyry, and it didn't go well, and it led to a breakaway the other way that Hellberg saved. But overall, again, like Bichsel, that's one moment that stuck out to me early. But I think this was also a game that was just so kind of frenetic and crazy both ways. It's really hard to pick one moment of any player because there were so many mistakes on both sides by both teams. So many breakaways, so many odd man rushes, so many 5-on-3s. I'm hard pressed to point to any one moment and say that helps or hurts any player's chances. I think Blümel, it'll probably come down to what DeBoer wants. And by the way, we should say best wishes to DeBoer too, who's having an appendectomy. It sounds like. Sounds like it was caught in a screen as opposed to symptoms. So I'm no doctor, but that sounds like that's impressive. than going in with symptoms, right? So that impressive. Yeah, exactly. So best wishes to Pete DeBoer.
It's amazing what those screenings can pick up nowadays. And, for simple humans like us, I'm not trying to give a plug, but I got one about 4 or 5 years ago, and I walked out of there feeling great.
Wow.
I mean, the peace of mind knowing that, your organs are in good shape, no signs of cancerous, growths or anything like that. And they show you down to a pin needle as far as like your blockage levels. It's just fascinating, what they can do. So the fact that they picked up, because appendectomies, while they are just routine nowadays, if for some reason you don't pick it up and let's say it can cause damage. So, best wishes to Coach DeBoer. I was looking it up the other day, and at the end of this year, Robert, the Dallas Stars will be Pete DeBoer's second longest organization with. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. I feel like he just arrived yesterday. Didn't realize he was with San Jose for so many years. That one kind of, I didn't really think of him relating to San Jose, most recently with Las Vegas. But, then I started to think, because we don't talk a lot about Pete DeBoer, but I just feel as though the team really has embraced him. I feel like he's been really good with the media. I feel like he has this calm demeanor about him. And for a guy that's kind of jumped around the league, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, but, when you look at coaching, he's been in Jersey, he's been in Florida, he has been in San Jose, he has been in Vegas, now he's here. I feel like he's found, at least for now, a nice home.
Yeah, he's definitely, he has a law background too, right? I think he and John Cooper, right, have a similar background, if my memory is.
Yeah, great story. He was all set to work for a law firm and chose coaching instead.
Yeah. So he's definitely, he's not one of these coaches who's been kind of bouncing around the league or something because they're just trying to get a head coaching gig, right? This is a guy who everywhere he's been has kind of been the guy. And it's been very clear, even from year one in Dallas, it's been very clear that he's coming in with a plan and he has a vision for how things are going to go. And whether it's roster decisions or systems they play or whatever it is, he has no problem being the man and being the one accountable for how things are going to go and speaking up about it. And he could very well be the right person at the right time for Dallas, because it's all well and good to have a young coach that's kind of growing with the team. We all remember Glenn Gulletson back in the day.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But having someone like him who's seen a lot of different teams and a lot of different stages of kind of their talent curve, he seems as good as anyone to come in and see that Dallas is just right there, right? The crest of the wave. You still got some veterans who have a lot to give and a lot of leadership that they're showing, whether that was Pavelski before or Ben and Sagan and others now. I'm hard pressed to point to any huge missteps by him. Of course, we can always quibble about roster decisions or ice time or anything like that, but there's no denying the results he's gotten since he's gotten here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons I was excited to have you on, by the way, Robert was such a great piece of Spits and Suds last year. Really excited to have him on again this year throughout the season, is you have been at training camp, covering training camp. Has there been anything that has kind of caught your eye about this training camp? Any players that you're like, wow, I'm kind of fascinated by that?
Yeah, that's very timely. Thank you. I just put something up on my site about this today, actually.
Starsthoughts.com, everyone. Starsthoughts.com.
You got it. One thing I will say, the first thing that's jumped out to me, and I think I sometimes have a bias for penalty kill and face-off guys, kind of those third and fourth line players, whether it's Dadonov or back in the day, Blake Como or Sam Steele even last year. And then this year they brought in a guy from Chicago that I know you were talking about on a show the other day, Colin Blackwell. And I mean, you probably have heard his story, right? But he's someone who's overcome a lot, Masterton nominee last year. And he comes in, I mean, he's a Harvard guy, right? He's comes in camp,
he is.
And boy, it really seems to me, I mean, we'll see. No one's wanted to commit to what line he's played on in talking to him and Sam Steele both. They're both kind of like, well, we'll see how it shakes out or whatever. But they both, have Steele also winger center. Blackwell came in as a center and then played on his off wing last year in Chicago because that's what they needed. And boy, you can really see a great fourth line with the two of them and Dodonov on it.
Yeah.
That line could do just about anything you want it to.
Yeah.
So he's a player that seems like he is absolutely going to make the Stars really strong this year.
Yeah, I mean, if he needs to,
fourth line.
yeah, he can really kind of agitate, but he can also put points on the board, which I like.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Dodonov needs on that for. And Sam Steele can put up numbers too. So it's kind of a grinding line, but at the same time, they can kind of get involved. So I am totally honest on this program, Robert. And I will tell you, you just mentioned bias. Blackwell grew up about 30 minutes from where I grew up. And and he went to high school about 10 minutes from where I grew up. So yes, total bias. And yes, we will have
you're getting the real scoops here. Never mind.
Oh, well, I mean, it's going to be the worst podcast ever because I'm going to be talking about fried clams and, stuff like that, whether he likes a deep dish pizza out of Chicago or fried clams out of Massachusetts. But he is a good story. For those that don't know, suffered some serious injuries, fought his way back onto the Harvard roster. And for those that don't know, Harvard is a very good hockey program. And then fought his way through years of organizations in the minor leagues, whether it was with the Milwaukee Admirals or some other programs, and then kind of bounced around and came back from a pretty serious injury in Chicago. And you're right, getting the Masterton, which if you are nominated for the Masterton, you have done some great things in the room and as far as the players respecting you. So yeah, really excited to bring him to the room. I mentioned the other night, I mean, analytics really doesn't show this, Robert, but at the same time, guys like Blackwell, in talking with some Minnesota contacts, they rave about Dumba in the room and outside in the community as far as what he does. I know that he is known for the Pavelski hit here, but I think I think Stars fans, when they see him in the community, are going to love Matt Dumba. So I'm excited about that as well. So you can't replace a Joe Pavelski, but you did add some kind of good people in the room.
They really did. They feel just deeper overall. That's not to say that it's guaranteed they'll be better. They had a fantastic season last year, really, when you step back and look at it. So who knows? A lot of things can happen. Injuries happen. All sorts of things can happen. But yeah, they look a lot deeper. And a player like Dumba in particular, I was talking to him this morning too about the game on Saturday, and he said there were a couple moments where you just realize, oh, whoops, I'm not exactly in the spot I should be in this new system, and there's adjustments, and you kind of just go, you say something loudly because you realize that you're not exactly where you need to be. But it's one of those things that, I mean, he's been around, right? He played for two different teams last year and was with Minnesota for a while before that. He's fitting right in too. He seems like exactly the sort of player that whether he plays with Heiskanen or he scales down the lineup, he's a player that's going to be really helpful, and he's got some flexibility. And that's, if there's one thing DeBoer loves with his players, it's the ability to have those interchangeable parts. And they've got a lot of them and some good ones this year.
So I was thinking about having Jeff K on because Jeff K is my official phonetics guy because all of a sudden Bichsel has turned into Bichsel. So wondering what the situation is there. I mean, we kind of had it a few years ago with Heiskanen and Heiskanen, and we all know Canadians refer to him as Sagan.
Yeah.
But I mean, we always kind of knew it as Sagan, but that one kind of like caught me by surprise on Victory Plus. I'm like, man, I was thinking it was Bichsel.
So here's what I do know and here's what I don't know. I haven't talked to, Stars PR or anything about this officially, but I do know that they with every player, they do this, right? They ask them and confirm what pronunciation they want or prefer or whatever, because sometimes there's multiple, right? And I also know that the broadcasters do this too. And Brent Severin mentioned on Twitter today that Josh Bogorod had a long conversation with Lian Bichsel or whoever, specifically about how to say his name. So I suspect one theory I have, and this is just a theory, I'm not reporting this, but one theory I have is that maybe the Swiss or even kind of German pronunciation, really that pronunciation for like a native speaker would be Bichsel, something like that. And you can see that on like some Swiss broadcasts and things like that of his games with Rugla last year. But often players will prefer, and even people from other countries who aren't NHL players will sometimes tell people specifically, and I've had some coworkers actually who did this too, who said, hey, technically my name is pronounced this way in my language, but it's probably better if you just pronounce it this way and kind of anglicize it for English speakers, because sometimes it's almost worse for them to hear people trying to say it properly and they mangle it more. Whereas if they just kind of simplify the pronunciation, sometimes they actually prefer that. So it could be that. That's just a theory. I don't know that, but I do know that the team always does, and especially the broadcasters always do their due diligence with stuff like this. So I'm sure that they aren't just guessing. I'm sure they have a good reason for going with Bichsel. And if I find out what it is, or someone else, I think Sam Nestler might be ahead of me on this one, but we'll see. But we'll get an answer to that certainly. But my guess is it's something like that. But again, just a guess.
Well, we knew his size, but I don't know if Stars fans noticed this, but when he scored that game-winning goal, and Ilya Lyubushkin went out to congratulate him, and like, I don't want to say he towered over Lyubushkin, but I mean, he was certainly wider and taller. And I'm like, my goodness, Lyubushkin's a pretty big guy. That is like fascinating. And one of the things that I said on the podcast the other night is we can talk about the physical play. And I know he made a mistake behind the net tonight. And I think that's a good learning experience for him. And they'll point that out. The coaches will. But what I don't want him to be known as just that. I think physicality certainly is a big part of his game. But what I was really impressed with the other night, Robert, was his skating ability and his breakout ability, and some really nice passing as well. I think that stuff is surprising for such a large man.
Mm-hmm. I think the line that Alain Nesriddin had this morning when he was asked about Lian was, well, he's 6'6", he can skate, and he's got pretty good hands. So that is the type of player that can take over games. That is, yeah. When you've got tools like that, that's kind of a coach's dream, because they should be that good, right? I mean, that's the comparison everyone's mentioned that I've seen, at least, especially in the last few months here, has been Jamie Oleksiak, and that's kind of the player that they hoped they were getting with Oleksiak. And the criticism of Oleksiak was kind of early on that he was hesitant to use his size and wasn't quite as nasty and able to like take over games. He was more of a great skating defenseman for his size, especially. Oleksiak always was, and he had decent hands, but he just couldn't quite take over games in the way that kind of people wanted him to with his type. But I don't think there'll be any problem based on tonight with Lian Bichsel taking over games when he's feeling it. Again, he's still young, right? We forget that this isn't a 26-year-old player. He hasn't had the opportunity that Thomas Harley had to kind of come up, taste the league, and then go back down and perfect some very specific things and really just kind of get all the parts of the system defensively and otherwise kind of down pat. But it certainly seems like not only the raw tools are there, but the right instincts are there too. So it's pretty exciting to see what he's brought so far, even with the acknowledgement that there's still probably some growth that needs to happen before he's really ready to hold down a spot in the top six.
We're starting to see special teams kind of a beginning in practice. You witnessed some special teams being worked on, and a lot of youngsters on those special teams, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, that's with the game group this morning. We were hoping that they'd run lines so we could at least have some idea of what they were going to be doing tonight, and that would have been really helpful since the altcast, the Texas hockey huddle they did tonight was kind of out of necessity, not as focused on the details like that.
Right.
But yeah, they've been, and DeBoer also mentioned on Saturday after the game that they haven't really had any chance to work on special teams, so they're going to start doing that now. And it's also, with Texas Stars training camp starting next week. I think it usually starts beginning of October. And it makes sense that you want some of these guys to get a taste for this. And then the latter part of the preseason is when they'll really start dialing in the roster and perfecting special teams for the guys they kind of expect to be on the 23-man roster opening night, or 22-man, I guess, depending on what they go with. But it's been neat to see. I mean, even tonight you saw Niels Lundqvist running a power play and racking up like 24 minutes. You've seen Kyle Capobianco, who isn't as young a player. He's got a lot of NHL time, but he got to have a lot of power play time the other night. It's pretty neat to see with all of these players. I mean, what they can do with open ice, and that's a player like Blümel, for instance. You kind of need to see him contributing on the power play, because otherwise it's hard to see him breaking a roster in and getting a roster spot. He kind of needs time to show that great shot that he has.
So I was talking to a Spits and Suds listener, and they were talking about Lundqvist, and my point kind of was Suter-esque. Whereas when Suter was on that front line with Heiskanen, you started to see like some age, and it's like, wow. But then when you saw him in a third line pairing, I thought he had a good year for what it was. He might have worn down in the playoffs, but I thought he was actually a pretty good third line pairing. And I would say the same thing, Robert, about Nils Lundqvist. Well, I know that will always, the playoffs will always kind of live in Stars fans and our memories. At the same time, if you're talking about a seventh or eighth defenseman in Nils Lundqvist, you're talking about a guy with NHL experience. And now you can go top six defenseman plus four deep of guys, minus actually Bichsel, and he's probably your best, that have quality NHL experience.
Yeah, it's kind of a luxury. Now that we're a couple years removed from the trade that brought Lundqvist in, I'm hopeful that the dialogue around him will be maybe more kind of grounded for myself included. I guess all of us kind of, at the time you always want to have those discussions. But it turns out that really it wasn't about Suter versus Lundqvist on the power play or in the top line. It was really just, they just needed to get Harley up, right? And once Harley had the chance to kind of get everything in order and really be overripe kind of from his time in Texas, Thomas Harley came up, and suddenly it wasn't quite as big a deal because they had a pretty solid top four, and that suddenly made it a lot easier to move Suter down into that third role where he was pretty productive last year. This year, though, with the depth that they brought in, I do think the ceiling is higher. Again, maybe Suter would have been okay in that third line role, but they've said that they want to try Lundqvist with Lindell at some point. So at least in camp, maybe to start the season when he comes in or if he comes in. They also said today that one of the pairings that they're going to experiment with is Brendan Smith and Ilya Lyubushkin. So if Smith is playing and they're planning on putting Smith with Lyubushkin, then that kind of tells you, well, Lindell, Harley, and Heiskanen are all playing too, and Dumba. There's not all of those pairings. You can't have both the Smith and Lyubushkin and Lundqvist pairing there if everyone's healthy. So we'll see how it shakes out, but they definitely have more depth this year. So I somehow do not think we'll see another, 5 defensemen in the playoffs by choice situation this year.
From your practice recap that I was reading on starsthoughts.com, I really appreciated the conversation you had with Elaine Nazardine, the assistant coach for the Stars, talking about face-off draws, whereas the percentage doesn't look too much of a difference year over year, but it actually was a big difference according to Nazardine.
Yeah, I asked him that in the scrum this morning, and he mentioned, or I guess conference, whatever you call it. I need to get these terms right if I'm going to be there, right? And he mentioned Blackwell specifically as a player who they didn't really know how skilled he was on faceoffs until he came in. And now he's one of those players, right, who can be your second center of the opposite-handedness on a line. But last year, yeah, their PK faceoff percentage really dipped last year. Even though they were still second in the league last year in faceoffs overall, they lost a lot more on the penalty kill. And whereas the year before, they were, I think, 53% on the penalty kill. I'm going off memory, but it's on the site. They dipped a lot last year on the penalty kill specifically. And so the hope, I think, is in bringing in some of these guys and having a really stacked bottom six, right? They also, traded Foxa as well. And Craig Smith's gone. So there's a few new looks in that bottom six. And there's a lot of good players there too, especially with Bork looking like he's going to hold down a full-time spot. It seems very possible that they're going to continue being one of the best face-off teams in the NHL. And even though I don't know that that's necessarily the thing that wins you 10 games a season, it's also the thing that can win you a game when you need it, if you win a face-off at a really crucial time. So that's a really nice tool to have in your back pocket, and it's a skill the team has had really for a long time. Every time I see Rich Peverley around, that's something you always think of.
So I was just about to bring up Rich Peverley, which I can't say it enough. I think he's big time in the Stars' future, and if he's not in the Stars' future, I think he's a future GM. And when I had him on, I asked him about face-off draws and if he had anything to do with Maverick Bork's, improved face-off draw percentage at the time when Bork was in the AHL, and he wouldn't admit it, but he said, yeah, maybe I worked with him. So I think, going from player development now to, some front office work, it's, you mentioned that in starsthoughts.com, and it's something that, is really cool to see, where you're seeing a lot of stars' names hanging around the rink now, helping out, whether it's been Bishop, just trying to think of some others that you mentioned on Stars
Yeah,
Thoughts. You
well,
actually
Jordy Ben
mentioned
is the newest one, right? They
Jordy
just
Ben
hired
is
him.
a terrific name.
Mhm.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you feel as though Alice Hemsky is going to be doing some stuff with the team.
Well, he's just a landlord right now, right? I think
But
he's a
still.
landlord for Blümel right now. But yeah, he always seems to be around, shows up at the alumni events. So yeah, we'll see. I gotta pin
But
him
just
down sometime and ask him what his plans are too.
just a real cool group. Sevi, Marty Turco, just a bunch of names. Travis Moore, a kind of a Texas Stars legend.
Yeah, he and Fortunis both. I think I saw
Yeah.
both of them out there today, if I'm not mistaken, working with the late group in practice presumably before Texas Stars camp. If I'm not mistaken, again, this was just a guess from a ways out through a couple different windows and boards. But there's something about the organization that they're doing right. That doesn't mean any organization is perfect, but there's probably a reason why a lot of these folks tend to come back and want to hang around, and that tends to build a pretty strong culture, right? That sends a pretty strong message, especially to newer kids, about what it means to wear that sweater, as they always say.
Yeah, absolutely. Also wanted to give a quick stick tap before we get into your questions to John Tortorella and the entire Philadelphia Flyers organization. Today, a kind of guest coach and helping out around the rink was Guy Gaudreau. Obviously, the father of Johnny and his brother, who tragically passed away. A terrific Stars tribute the other night, and they're doing it throughout the NHL. But I just wanted to say stick tap to the Flyers, because I bet for an hour and a half, Guy's mind, as tough as it could be, just went back to hockey, and I think that's special. So I know that teams have a lot to concentrate on, but I think that's kind of a great team building. It was awesome afterwards when Tortorella, talked about Guy. The Flyers got in a line and everyone shook his hand. So I just stick tap to the Flyers organization. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's very neat. It's man, it's really, I remember back with the when there was that horrible bus crash.
Yes.
Broncos, right? And some players lost their lives, and how the whole kind of hockey world pulled together to kind of honor their memory and support the people who were dealing with it and everything, both the community, the team, and kind of the whole league. And we're seeing something similar now, that in the wake of just a horrible tragedy like that, you're seeing a lot of people kind of understand that the instinct is correct, right? When you face a tragedy like that, instead of just sitting around and mourning, you need to pull together and kind of remind each other why you do this and what it means to be alongside a dad who's grieving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. Steven at Steady Rhythms says Bichsel had a couple of great plays, but if I was tracking correctly, he was also responsible for the first goal against, looked dizzy on a 2-on-1, gave up a 1-on-1 with the goalie, and then fought the forward for making him look bad. He still has some adjusting to do. He also adds, not overreacting. Tonight showed me Bichsel's game is just still too inconsistent for the NHL just yet. So wanted to get your thoughts on that. I mean, hey, listen, another half season in the Texas Stars organization. I mean, really, this is going to be his first lengthy stay on as far as North American hockey.
Yeah. Sean had a great article in D Magazine the other day about Bichsel specifically, and kind of his attitude of, I have made the decisions I'm going to make about my career and about my game and on the ice and all that. And he doesn't seem to care too much about what other people think about that. And that attitude can carry you a long way if you have the skills to back it up. And I think there's no question that he's got the raw talent to back it up. So it's really just a matter of kind of ironing out those details and earning coach's trust. And it seems like he'll have every chance to do that this year. And we know that he was actually, again, I think Sean reported that he was a low-key he was the next guy up if Tanev couldn't go, and I think it was Game 4 against Edmonton. So we know that the organization thinks pretty highly of him and thinks he's not too far away. But if they have the luxury of people staying pretty healthy and him being able to kind of prove it and get overripe just like Harley did, that's the dream for all of them, right? So we've seen it with Stankoven and Bork, kind of spent more time in the AHL than they probably quote unquote needed. And, it looks like it's going to be of benefit to them. So if he trods the same path, then so much the better.
And you just mentioned Sean Shapiro, and we did want to kind of under interesting, terms. Um, so he is going to be the editor in chief, whether it's temporary or not. But JD Burke, who's the editor in chief for EP Ringside, is taking a leave of absence so he can get his health and stick tap to JD, who's done a lot for this game. And we wish him the best in a speedy recovery. I know he's excited to get healthy again, but in the interim, Sean Shapiro will be taking over. So how he juggles everything, kudos to Sean, but he's one of the best, and excited anytime Sean gets gigs because he deserves it.
If he can work 11 jobs, he can work 12. I don't see what the problem is. Yeah, it should be fine.
Absolutely. I love it. I direct messaged him today and I said, I have applied for your assistant position.
Yeah. Look, you're not going to get me to say anything complimentary about Sean because we all know how great he is and all that. But yeah, they're getting a good one. Let me say all the official stuff. Yeah. I'm sure he'll do a great job. But come on, we all know this. We all know this. I don't need to go on record saying too many nice things about him.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. And then the people that like follow regular like EP Ringside, they're gonna be like, "What's up with all these goalie articles all of a sudden?" All right. Spits and Suds loyalist Chris Barnard says he's liking the makeup of this team: aggression, physicality. Could you see a move made on offense to accommodate Bach or oh my God, I'm gonna get this name right. Hyry, right? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Hyry with the H.
Hyry.
Yeah.
Hyry.
Hyry and
Hyry.
Beck. The umlaut makes it a kind of a Beck, Oscar Beck.
Yes.
It's
okay.
Instead of back. It's very just. I only know this because I've had to figure all these out the last few days to not embarrass myself more than usual.
Yeah, let Gavin Spittle embarrass himself.
Yeah. And really, it's a battle for that 13th spot. Assuming the fourth line ends up being Blackwell, Steele, and Dodonov, which is my guess at this point, is how it'll shake out. Again, it's a guess, but I think it's a pretty good one at this point. Then I'd say probably Beck is probably slightly ahead of the others right now, kind of in the competition for that, just because he can kill penalties. He's got some size too. He seems like he'd be a great F1 type forechecker, in the Mason Marchment mold of someone who can just go and get to the puck first and really, make good stuff happen, fight along the boards. That sort of player, that's a very versatile player. And again, it seems like DeBoer really loves versatile players. Whereas if you bring up a player like Blümel, you kind of have to have him in the right situation for him to really be successful. It wouldn't be fair to him. That'd be like bringing up Logan Stankoven to play on the fourth line.
Right.
That's. I mean, he's great. He's also a really good forechecker, actually. But you know that he's best when he's in kind of a top six type role, as we've seen from Stankoven. So similarly with Blümel, he needs to be somewhere he can be successful, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily on the fourth line.
Chris says both have impressed. He also adds he'd move to Donoff and have Blackwell as the 13th. Also, huge decisions to be made with Bichsel and Nils, who have both looked good. So a couple of things, Chris. One is that Nils is on a guaranteed contract and the Stars are up against the cap. I think they have about 1.4, Robert, of cap space, roughly.
Well, it depends on how many players they dress. If they only dress the bare minimum, like 12 forwards and 6 defensemen, then they'd have, I think, 2.2 or something like that million, if not more. Maybe that's with 13 forwards actually. But they have enough space actually this year to have an extra forward and an extra defenseman on opening night, which is kind of a closer to a normal roster than kind of the cap crunch we've seen the last couple of years, where they always just have the bare minimum. But it's Bichsel. Again, if he earns a spot, the way Jim Nill runs his organization, if a player really does force the issue, we saw it with Matthias Janmark years back. And again, Hyry could do the same thing. I haven't quite seen that so far in camp. Hyry was good in Traverse City. I haven't quite seen him kind of blowing the doors off in camp or forcing the issue yet. We'll see. He scored a goal tonight, so that could be part of it. He's a good player. He's a veteran too, for a kid in his early mid-20s, right? But as far as moving Dodonov to make a spot for one of those guys, I don't think that makes your team better. I think Dodonov is a versatile player who can scale up the lineup, and I think he's excellent on a line with two great kind of checking type players who also can add offense in Blackwell and Steele. So I don't know why you'd move one of them for someone who's less you move Dadonov for someone who's less proven. Dadonov just brings too much. He's just too versatile and too skilled. He's a valuable player. He's a really good player. He can play top 6.
Right.
He's a great player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Blackwell's a guy that you just have to have in the lineup when you can. I mean, you look and just, pretty consistent, and, they rave about him, and pretty good, like a defensive forward as well. And, I know that he played on not such a great Blackhawks team. So let's see how he does on a winning team. I mean, you look at the teams he's been on, and, they haven't been all great. So,
he said that too. When I was talking about this, he said last year he knew his job was kind of be the mentor for some of the kids in a tough season.
Right.
And that's the job. But that he's very excited to be on a team that's in a different part of their curve. If I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he's excited to win. He's excited to win.
Absolutely. Chris Strong asked, this one seems up for debate at the moment. How should we pronounce Bichsel? Does he have a preference? I love that we've seen from him this preseason. Thanks, y'all. So we went over it, Chris, but it's still a great question. And I think we're going with Bichsel. So
I think if that's the way if Josh Bogorad is pronouncing it that way and Jeff Kay is pronouncing it that way, as they both did on Saturday, then that's a pretty good indicator to me that they probably have done more research than any of us have. So I'm going to stick with that for now until we get more information.
Yes. Chris Stabkoven asked, could Artuu force his way onto the roster over to Dadonov or Blackwell? I know highly doubtful, but one of the young forwards not named Stankoven and Bork, he's been really impressive. I think that he'd be up for that 13th, but I don't feel as though he's better than Steele, Blackwell, and Dadonov.
No, that's I genuinely think that fourth line of Steele, Blackwell, and Dadonov could be among the best fourth lines in the NHL. Genuinely. Yes. And again, we're not talking about a third line that, pretends to be a fourth line or whatever. This is a line that actually probably would be the fourth line. If you have Sagan, Marchment, and Duchesne, that and or the, Bork and Stankoven line with Ben, one of those is your second or third line. The other is your second or third line. And then you have Steele and Blackwell and Dadonov, all of whom can score on your fourth line. I mean, I just don't see a reason why you'd put an Oscar Beck or even an Artuu Hyry, even if he blows the doors off in the last 4 games of the preseason. That just doesn't make sense. But for the 13th forward spot, yes, Hyry could win that spot, but it remains to be seen. I don't think that's been decided yet, and I'd probably give Beck a 52% edge right now.
Robert, our friend Howie, was at the game tonight. Howie, he lives in Denver. He says, at the game right now, my first thought, oh my gosh, number 6 is huge. Other thoughts are Johnston, Stankoven, and Bork are going to be a lot of fun this year. Yeah, the kids are just having fun out there and laughing. And I'm just knocking on wood all the time that there's no injuries. But man, I just feel as though just even little things like their back checking ability, Robert, where they are chasing after the puck, and just the thought that defensemen and or forwards, when they're moving up the ice, kind of have to look in the rearview mirror because one of the kids is coming to lift that stick. And, we saw it last year with what Johnston and Stankoven could do. Now you have another one on the ice in Bork.
They're really good. Bork's game is far more complete, I think, than most fans are used to seeing a center come up. I mean, it's hard to compare anyone to Wyatt Johnston. Wyatt Johnston is legitimately, I think, on the cusp of being. I mean, he was probably the Stars' best player last season, genuinely, and they had some good players last season, absolutely. And so, Bork is not going to come up and be the Stars' best player this season, I don't think, but he doesn't have to be. I think he's going to come up and be really reliable. He's the better he gets on faceoffs, the more trust he's going to earn from DeBoer to hold down a line and center a line himself. I mean, you could have 4 centers, and again with 2 centers on each line, right? Which they legitimately would if you have Wyatt Johnston up with Rope Hintz. I mean, how good of a top line could that be with Robertson? And then you go down, you have Bork and Ben, you have Duchesne and Sagan, and then you have Steele and Blackwell down on your fourth line. I mean, it's just the depth. And so many of those are kids, right? The age of the roster. This isn't, a Tampa trying to kind of squeeze the last little juice out of the lemon. This is a team that's perfectly balanced, where you have players who are perfectly okay with kind of transitioning into and out of roles at the right time in their career. It's they've got a chance to do something really special. I mean, we've seen it the last couple of years. They're close, and it really reminds me of kind of where Tampa was early on after they got close a couple of years and before they had that run of making the finals 3 years in a row. The Stars really remind me of kind of where Tampa was at that time when they had Sergachev after a couple of years starting to really be a reliable defenseman, and Stamkos was still contributing, and it wasn't, well, anyway, they're at a really good spot, and I think there's every chance that these young kids like Bourque and Bichsel can be the ones that really help push them all the way.
Let's end on a fun note because we have a whole lot of new numbers on the ice. Is there anyone in the first 2 games or in practice where you see the number and immediately you think of a former Star? Because I will say I saw a 10 on the ice tonight, and I was like, at first I was thinking Brendan Morrow, and then oddly Sean Horkoff came to mind as a former number 10.
Yes, there are 2 for me. One is number 36 that I'm going to blank on, of course, right now since I brought it up. And there are 2 36s in Stars history that I think of in particular when I see the number 36. It's Luke Chris right now in camp, who's a younger guy, played a few games with Texas last year. But the 2 36s I think of are a forward and defenseman. The defenseman was a Danish player named Philip Larsen, who was also during that time before Klingberg. Yes. They just looking, Ivan Wisniewski, they were hoping he'd be something.
Yes.
And Philip Larsen for a little bit, they were hoping he'd be their puck moving defenseman when they, Zubov had left, and they just didn't really have anyone in that mold in the system. And Larsen got some games.
I think they traded him for Sean Horkoff, didn't they?
I think that's right. And, he got some games. He bounced around the NHL a little bit and played some more games. I mean, good player, just not really the player that the Stars needed him to be. But the other 36 is, I think, much more noteworthy. I remember way back in 2006, I was visiting Dallas. I didn't live here at the time, and I was visiting. And so my brother and I drove up to Frisco just to see a practice before a game. And we almost, on our way out, we watched the practice. It was a lot of fun. I think maybe it was 2008, because I think Brad Richards was there at the time, so it might have been later. But I'll always remember almost accidentally hitting UC Jokinen with the car out of the parking garage because he was jogging outside. It was like 30 degrees outside, almost snowing, and UC Jokinen, number 36 of shootout fame, was just jogging, very happily. And it was a good thing we were looking where we were going, because that probably wouldn't have gone very well.
Wow. Yeah. Yes, on July 4th, 2013, Horkoff was traded by the Oilers to the Stars in exchange for Philip Larsen and a 7th-round pick.
Good pull. That's a good one. If you'd asked me when did he leave the organization, I don't think I would have pulled that for a long time. So,
yeah. What's fascinating is Horkoff was always known as a very smart player. He's now the assistant general manager for the Red Wings and general manager of the Grand Rapids Griffiths of the AHL. So he's now in upper hockey management. So probably a future NHL GM, which I think a lot of people kind of predicted when he was a player.
Yeah, in retrospect, Jim Nill kind of showed us exactly what his priorities were going to be, because, Jamie Benn had been playing center because there were so few centers in the organization that were really ready for the NHL. And the first thing Jim Nill did was bring in Rich Peverly, Tyler Seguin, and Sean Horkoff all in one offseason in 2013, just to say, we're going to have centers here now. We're going to make sure we keep having centers. And he's done that pretty much ever since.
My other one that I always identify with 6 is Trevor Daley.
Yes.
When he had that ice when he got speed behind him, man, I just loved watching him on the ice.
The 2013, the first season with the New Jerseys, the first season with Ben as captain, that playoff series where they just eked into the 8th spot and they played the Ducks in the first round. He had a couple of games that I think are just all-timers for him, where he had one breakaway, like a shorthanded breakaway or something, where he scored. I think he had 2 goals in the game, or so. It was just, I think it was the game 6 actually that ended in heartbreak when they lost in overtime. But yeah, that season, it was like everything he'd always wanted to do, but he hadn't been able to do because there were other players in the pecking order above him. The leash was finally off, and boy, that was a fun season to watch him. He was a lot of fun. Great guy.
Yeah. Now Trevor Daley, by the way, serves as special assistant to Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh.
He's in Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. Yep.
So I love reading like what these guys.
He's there. Spets is there. Joe Pavelski was visiting there. Everyone's going to Pittsburgh after Dallas, I guess. Yeah.
Sean and I have always talked about doing, and it would probably take some and you need some help from organization to really do deep dives, like where are they now, and just
Mhm.
come up with random stars names.
Hmm.
Just even the few that we've mentioned tonight, like even, Robida is with Montreal now in their organization. So,
Mhm.
I love what all the former stars are doing, like maintaining, in the game. So,
Oh yeah.
hey man, this has been a lot of fun. Hard to believe we've almost gone an hour. It just feels like we just started because Robert Tiffin is so great at this. At Robert Tiffin on Twitter/X. And please, if you go to starsthoughts.com, they're really like quick paragraphs as far as some of the things Robert learned at camp. And I'm telling you, like my knowledge as far as like camp and just different little conversations and analytics Robert throws in, it is absolutely terrific. And you can also, just like Sean, just like David Castillo, you can follow. And I always say click, click, click when it comes to D Magazine because they're doing a terrific job in town as far as covering the Dallas Stars. So make sure you catch the next time Robert is in D Magazine. A lot of fun, buddy. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work at training camp.
Thanks, Gavin. Always appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we will be back after the game on Wednesday. And as they play Minnesota, and it would be nice to go 3-0. Sure. Who will we see in the lineup? So it'll be really exciting. And you know what? I want to end on this. And Robert, feel free to chime in. Personally, I would have loved to seen like a little bit of a bigger screen so we could watch the game tonight. But I want to say this about Victory Plus. I do think it's cool that they're trying things. And I'm just like
Yeah.
letting people know, like, we got to make sure that we're not too quick on the trigger because this is innovation. This is new. Other teams are not doing it, but other teams are watching and they're trying things out. So tonight, the experiment with Brad Alberts and obviously Razor was, terrific. And just I thought it was pretty cool. I just wanted to see
Yeah.
like more, but I thought Brian Ray did a good job explaining as far as what we were seeing and why we were seeing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I thought that, that was cool. It was a little tough to watch at times. And that's nothing against Victory, but I also want Stars fans to realize, and they talked to Razor about this. Brian did a really smart thing and brought up how many preseason games would we see in the past?
Usually, I think one, right
One.
at the end, we'd get one, and
Now we're
occasionally
seeing
you might get
6.
another team feed streamed on their website or something if you're lucky. Yeah,
Absolutely. So
yeah,
the fact that we're seeing so many now, I mean, and more to come, I think that's really cool.
yeah. I think perspective is the key for stuff like this because the fun parts of it tonight were really fun, and I think Brian was very clear multiple times that we're trying this. This is all new. We're just kind of I he even said pretty clearly, and I don't know this for sure, but just from what he said on the broadcast, it seems like they had to kind of negotiate with Colorado to get the feed because it's the Colorado Jumbotron feed that then they were allowed to stream on Victory Plus, but it sounds like with some conditions, and one of them being that they couldn't just do a straight play-by-play broadcast. So there
Yeah.
probably were some restrictions they had to navigate. I'm guessing one of them might have been also not having it take up the whole screen, right? It wouldn't shock me if that was also. So
Yeah.
it sounds like they were working with some kind of restrictions and with some boundaries in place. So I have every confidence that if we knew the full story, we'd probably say, wow, they did a really good job with what they had to work with. And frankly, it was a lot of fun too, because there were good stories in all three periods, and especially
Yeah.
hearing Razor and Sevi and Brian Ray obviously have great chemistry from all the intermissions that they've done over the years. But that was a lot of fun hearing them witness just the absolute cavalcade of penalties in the second period. It was just wild and crazy, and it was a good time. And again, we wouldn't have been watching this game in years past. I don't know how many road radio broadcasts I remember trying to stream, even 5-10 years ago, just desperately trying to get something. And even those are mostly tailored to the home crowd, right? So you'd occasionally hear a Star's name or number, and then you're trying to parse, how well a prospect is performing just based on that radio broadcast. This is miles ahead of that. So yeah,
Right.
perspective. Absolutely. It was
And
great.
it's great to bring on a former Stars great in Lukowich. Everyone kind of knows, his story. I thought he was terrific in the third period, telling some great stories. And once again, in the Stars organization, helping out, coaching,
Yeah.
saying he just got back from Colorado himself. So you kind of have a coach's perspective. So I thought it was really, really cool. So,
Yeah.
continue
Graded
to
on a
stick
curve.
around.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, we'll continue to watch it, and it's okay to bring these things up. But the only thing I ask Stars fans is just give it time. And I'm proud of this organization for experimenting, because that's one of the things I try to do on the radio station. You cannot be afraid to fail. And I have put on some events that have failed, and I have put on some events that I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that, there was such, you know, um, for instance, we put on a cornhole tournament, and I had never thrown a cornhole tournament. So I just named prize money, Robert. And all of a sudden I was getting calls from across America. Well, Gavin Spittle had no idea as far as prize money. And apparently the prize money I was putting up was, I don't want to say comparable to the US Open of cornhole, but it was a pretty good payday. So we had teams flying in from LA, Chicago for
You
this
got all the ringers
cornhole.
coming in for the
total
cornhole
ringers. Total ringers, and it was a free tournament.
Oh,
so
man.
They were excited, and all the Texas people were then mad at me because I allowed these pros in. And meanwhile, I'm like, man, I just wanted people to show up. So it's kind of like, I hope you understand that's one of the examples is that sometimes you just don't know. So you experiment and see how it goes. And I appreciate it tonight for what that is. After hearing the story of the stadium feed, and it did once Brian explained, I said, wow, that is a stadium feed, because if you're at the Stars game and you look up at the scoreboard, that's the same
what you
feed.
see. Yep.
That's what you'd see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd much rather see them confidently try stuff, both with the regular Victory Plus broadcast and the content and things like this. I'd much rather see them try stuff and not be constrained by saying, oh, we have to deliver the same type of product that we did under the old rules. If you're going to launch a brand new network, you might as well try to push the limits and try new stuff. And I'm sure not all of it's gonna seem like the best thing you've ever seen the first time, but yeah, it's, give them some kudos for trying new stuff. I think that's always how you get innovation, how you get to a better place in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And to start on a year like this, when, as Brad Alberts pointed out, the popularity is probably at its highest, and we have to take all the equipment and go to Finland and figure out how to put it across the Atlantic Ocean for, just stuff like that. So,
should be great.
Tap. Robert, you're a beast. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks, Gavin.
All right, guys, we'll be back soon with another episode of Spits and Suds. You guys are terrific. Please, if you could, the only thing we ask is if you follow us on Apple and you want to leave a review, that's terrific. We love the 5 stars. That helps our search engine optimization. So that would be terrific. And if you get a chance, if you could retweet when an episode comes out and spread the word about Spits and Suds, that would be terrific as well. For the greatness of Robert Tiffin, I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. Have a great day, everyone.